With respect, y'all need some perspective.
We know more than ever before, but who knew bias was the bane of all you study? We know more than ever before, but who knew bias was the bane of all you study?
There's an old saying, it's always darkest before the dawn. I believe I figured out why that is. It's because the dawn of a given human community making the right decision is preceded by events so terrible that they can't be ignored anymore. So let's get right to it. Today is July 14th, 2024. Yesterday, on July 13th, there was an apparent assassination attempt on former president and current candidate Donald J. Trump. A historical moment, to be sure. I have noticed that when one of these historical moments come about, for all the millions of people in the United States, there's really only a handful of responses repeated over and over again. Yet another sign that people have more in common than they have differences. Anyway, I'm creating this video to give my final opinion on 3 of those perspectives. The first is kind of a throwaway. I almost didn't include it, but it's how Americans process everything through the cultural construct called race. Now hold on. You might be thinking, there's no race angle to yesterday's assassination attempt. Well, at the time I wrote this essay, there had already been a picture circulating of the alleged assailant. Most news channels are featuring this photograph and assigning the name Thomas Matthew Crooks to the person in the image. As you can see, the possibility that this individual is a person of color seems low. And then I saw this comment online. Now, I'm not going to try to explain to someone who feels this way why Black Americans would be relieved that the alleged would-be assassin is not Black. Frankly, I'm assuming it would just fall on deaf ears if this adult hadn't already figured out why. Instead, I will point out that we have adults in this country that don't understand why the average African American would be relieved that the perpetrator isn't Black. That would be the actual problem. Instead, I'll play this short clip from a motion picture about the scary summer in the 70s where David Berkowitz, the infamous Son of Sam serial killer, terrorized New York neighborhoods.
Sandra Buchanan, I live there at 85 Crown Street. And I am going to give you your DACA perspective. The DACA perspective is, I thank God that it is a white man. Because if it were a black man who kills all of those white people, there would be the biggest race riot right here in New York City.
Maybe our friend can figure it out from that. Moving on. Next is 2 versions of really the same sentiment. The end is nigh. There are those of us that have trouble interpreting our role and station during historical moments. Most of it, in my opinion, comes from the arrogance that we are more than what we actually are. What I mean is this. The secular or non-religious version of this attitude usually sounds like this commenter. A person like this states that they think times have gotten really bad and usually does us a favor by naming who they think is most directly responsible. I'm not interested in the blame game. To me, it's more interesting to note that the reason why everything always seems like an ending is because people like this process historical moments against their personal lifespan, instead of through the eye of history. In a land of plenty like the United States, most, but not all, of us are fortunate. Most of us have a common attitude of having a simple, nostalgia-generating childhood. And when the innocence and naivety of our early years is juxtaposed to the worries and responsibilities of being an adult citizen, life is almost always found wanting. As the saying goes, life is a bitch. The longer we go, society always looks like the end is near. But that view is narrow and egocentric. Just about any study of any culture over a century or two tends to show more of a cycle of beginnings and endings. Some of our friends try to sound smart and bring up the fall of the Roman Empire. They conveniently forget that Rome still stands and still influences culture on a global scale, for better or for worse. Speaking of Rome's influence, our Christian, and to a lesser degree Muslim, friends are the key to understanding this egocentric interpretation of historical moments. Because of the way the New Testament is written, it is nigh impossible for a person to read it and not conclude that Jesus Christ will likely return in their lifetime, especially given how that and other prophecies are written. As a matter of fact, every single Christian generation has believed just that in the 2,000 years since. Just look at how this person grafted his religion onto the situation when he found out the suspect's name. It's a double irony that his theory is dependent on a misspelling, and the name he misspelled is the title of one of the New Testament Gospels. 14 years from now, it'll be 2038. That will mark the 100th anniversary of the start of World War II. I couldn't blame any Christian back then for seeing those historical figures with those atrocities and those weapons and concluding that the end was near. But look what happened. Society is still here despite the presence of nuclear armament. And not only is Germany and Japan still around, they're allies? Rational viewer, this is an issue of perspective. Are things bad? Yes. But you're not going to convince me that things are the worst they've ever been. The assassination attempt of July 13th, 2024 isn't even the first of its kind in the United States. It isn't even the first of its kind in my lifetime.
Ronald Reagan was 2 months into his presidency when John...
But don't be fooled. I'm not trying to say that everything's great, but I do think we're looking at the wrong cause. I fully acknowledge that ideological and cultural divisions are high and at dangerous levels. But historically, you know what usually quells that? The common people having what they need to survive. Ideological differences are one thing. Ideological division on an empty stomach is something completely different. I'm Odium. This is Message in a Bottle. Come back for the next reflection.
All the beliefs of the mind. But what's real or what's right has so little to do with those minds.